The Where Our Minds Wander podcast may contain sensitive content and explicit language. Listener discretion is advised. Greetings, fellow wanderers, to the places our minds wander.
The house at the end of the dirt road, where disembodied voices whisper and strange sounds make the living shiver.
Where shadows lurk at the edge of the woods, just outside your back door. And mysterious lights speed beyond reason across the clear night sky.
Odd events throughout time that lead you down the rabbit hole.
I'm Wes.
And I'm Beth.
And this is Where Our Minds Wander. Hello and welcome to Where Our Minds Wander, all you fellow wanderers. Thank you for joining us.
Welcome, everyone.
We have just a little bit of housekeeping before we get into tonight's story. If you haven't already, please take a minute and leave us a 5-star review and a comment on your favorite listening platform. Or you can just go to our website, whereourmindswander.com, and leave a rating there and a review for us.
We would greatly appreciate that. And at the end of this month, on September 28th, we will be at the Whitehall, New York Sasquatch Festival. So if you're in the area, come check it out. It's from 10 to 6, and it's right in the park in Whitehall, and it's going to be a great time.
It was awesome last year.
It was. We had a great time.
I think you would all like it. If you have a chance and you're in the area, check it out. And for tonight's episode, instead of sharing each separate stories, Beth and I chose to do one.
Yes, because we discovered that there is so much information that it would just be better to do the one topic instead of just kind of giving you too brief of a thing and moving on to something else.
Yeah, there was a lot of info on this topic.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of my favorites. So with that said, Beth's going to start us off as usual. So sit back, get comfy, and let's get into it.
The terrifying bird that we're going to be talking about tonight is so enormous that it can pick up a whale in its talons and carry it off to the tallest mountain peaks hidden in the clouds. Sometimes covered in bright, colorful feathers, they can also be brown and gray. But either way, this enormous bird is so large that its wingspan can be as wide as 70 feet. That's 70. When they fly overhead, flapping their great wings, a deep rumbling like thunder can be heard. Lightning bolts are said to shoot from their eyes. One would be an awesome and fearful sight, but a flock of them would be downright terrifying. When they're seen, they are most often seen as an omen. Often they bring rainstorms, and sometimes they're seen as a good omen, especially if the land is parched and in need of water. But other times, these great birds bring storms that cause mass destruction, including floods and forest fires. The Thunderbird has existed in Native American mythology throughout the North American continent since the very beginning, and they are often depicted as saving, or at least protecting, mankind from other evil forces, like the water spirits or the reptilian spirits. According to legendsofamerica.com, Thunderbirds are part of almost every single Native American culture. For example, in Algonquin mythology, which is from our neck of the woods, Thunderbirds control everything in the upper world and protect humans by throwing lightning bolts at the great panther or the horned serpent, which control the underworld. The Ojibwe people have a similar Thunderbird story, although in their legends, Thunderbirds fight underwater spirits and also punish humans who break moral rules. The Menominee people say that Thunderbirds live on a mountain that floats in the sky. They are also the enemy of a great horned snake, which sometimes scours the earth for humans to devour. The Menominee people see Thunderbirds as a good omen and a great protector. According to devilslakewisconsin.com, one legend tells about a massive battle between the Thunderbirds and these water spirits. The water spirits would hurl giant boulders into the air and create water spouts to try and rip the Thunderbirds from the sky. The Thunderbirds fought back for days, unleashing thunderbolts at the earth and water. Trees were ripped from the ground, and the stone cliffs were battered and crumbled. In the end, the Thunderbirds were triumphant. All that was left from their battle was a pristine lake. Other tribes attribute powers to Thunderbirds that can directly affect humans. For example, the Winnebago tell stories of Thunderbirds giving people supernatural powers. The Sioux people's stories say that Thunderbirds are shapeshifters and that humans can interact with them all the time. For the Shawnee, Thunderbirds can shapeshift into boys who speak backwards. The Tillamook people of Oregon tell a similar tale of Thunderbirds shapeshifting into the form of a human boy. Their legend goes that one day a man was out salmon fishing near Slab Creek when a powerful rainstorm blew in. The skies cleared for just a few moments, and as the man moved towards the water to try his luck, the sky darkened and rain poured down once again on him. Angry at not being able to fish, the man wondered out loud why the sky kept darkening. He noticed a tall spruce tree that had been carved out by a lightning strike. As he peered into the hole, a young boy climbed out. To the man's astonishment, this boy began to grow taller before his eyes until he was taller than the spruce tree. Then feathers sprouted from his skin. Angry at being questioned by the man, the Thunderbird grabbed him beneath the arms and flew off with him. The great bird brought the man to his mountain home, where he taught him to catch whales. After some time, when the man was tired of eating whale meat, he went back to the water to try and catch some salmon. The Thunderbird, whom the man called grandfather, warned him not to catch more than he could eat. When the man returned with just one large salmon, he was sad to discover that he had no knife to cut it with. The Thunderbird lifted a great rock and dropped it from a great height, smashing it into pieces. But each piece was still too heavy for the man to lift. Eventually, there was a piece of rock that the man could use as a knife to cut his fish. He happily roasted the fish, and he tried to eat it all, but he couldn't finish it. He went to sleep, but when he awoke the next morning, the half-burned fish was again swimming in the river. The Thunderbird told the man not to burn the fish. They don't like it, and they might take revenge on the man. Eventually, the man asked to be taken home. He missed his wife and children, and so the Thunderbird grabbed him from beneath the arms again and flew him home. The man had been gone for 4 years. The legend continues on, with the man eventually becoming a great shaman who could bring people back to life after they died. Back in episode 47, we covered the mystery of Cahokia, a Native American settlement in Illinois that archaeologists still can't fully explain. Well, we didn't mention this back then, but the people of Cahokia painted a Thunderbird on their cliffs. Known as the Piazza Bird, the massive cave painting terrified Jesuit priests who arrived in 1673, according to atlasobscura.com. Missionary Jacques Marquette wrote, quote, "We saw upon one of them 2 painted monsters, which at first made us afraid, and upon which the boldest savages dare not long rest their eyes. They are as large as a calf. They have horns on their heads like those of a deer, a horrible look, red eyes, a beard like a tiger's, a face somewhat like a man's, a body covered with scales, and so long a tail that it winds all around the body, passing above the head and going back between the legs, ending in a fish's tail." End quote. All of the legends about the Thunderbird are pretty interesting, not just because they're great stories with important life lessons, but because the idea of a massive bird, larger than most airplanes, is a little terrifying, especially since people have been seeing actual Thunderbirds since the 1800s. Now, you might argue that these early accounts are nothing more than misidentification, except the most recent sighting was in 2018. So Wes and I thought, let's look at these sightings and let you all decide for yourselves. So we'll start with Texas in 1976. According to SanAntonioCurrent.com, dozens of people spotted some sort of massive man-sized bird over a span of almost 2 years. It was New Year's Day, and teenage cousins Tracy Lawson and Jackie Davies were playing together in one of the girls' front yards in Harlingen. Suddenly, they noticed a 5-foot-tall bird leering at them. The girls ran inside and told their parents about this scary-looking, gigantic bird. When their parents went outside to investigate, they found strange 3-toed tracks. 6 days later, on January 7th, San Benito police officer Arturo Padilla caught something in his patrol car headlights, a 5-foot-tall bird with a 12-foot wingspan. Earlier that day, and a little under 20 miles away, a man named Alverso Guajardo had an up-close and personal encounter with a strange bird in Brownsville. He said he heard something slam into the side of his trailer that day, and when he went outside to investigate, he came literally toe-to-toe and face-to-face with a man-sized bird. He described it as, quote, like a bird, but not a bird, like something from another planet. A week later, on January 14th, 1976, a little under 50 miles away in Raymondville, a man named Armando Grimaldo had a rather aggressive encounter with a reported Thunderbird. Grimaldo was sitting outside that evening smoking a cigarette when he suddenly heard the sound of huge flapping wings over his head. Before he could even react, a giant bird attacked him. The bird gripped him by the shoulders with its powerful talons and knocked him to the ground. He said that although it was shaped like a giant bird, its face resembled a gorilla. Its entire body was covered in bat-like skin. The Thunderbird ripped Grimaldo's clothing to shreds, scratching him deeply. He was transported to the Willacy County Hospital where his wounds were treated, but he was also in a state of shock when he arrived and had to be treated for that as well, which I could see if a giant gorilla-faced, man-sized bird attacked you. 4 days later, 2 sisters claimed to have seen a massive bird drinking from a watering hole in Brownsville, and 2 soldiers spotted the massive bird flying over a ranch in Poteet, 250 miles away. The Texas sightings continued, with a description of the bird being mentioned in the Daily Review on January 22nd. A 21-year-old witness named Evancisco Magalenis claimed a 6-foot-tall brown and black bird with red eyes attacked him. He also described the creature's wings as bat-like. According to the radio station 101.9 The Bull, the Thunderbird sightings continued into late January and early February of 1976. On January 23rd, Jasper Kilroy claimed that he saw a long-necked, long-legged bird with very few feathers in his backyard around 5:45 p.m. 2 days later, 2 boys spotted a very big and very black bird flying over the San Felipe Creek. The last Texas Thunderbird sighting occurred in February of 1976. 3 teachers who were in 3 separate cars all saw the same creature as they followed each other along a secluded road outside of San Antonio. One of the teachers said that this bird was easily the size of a Piper Cub airplane and that it was so skeletal-looking that it closely resembled a pteranodon. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with a Piper Cub airplane, it has a wingspan of 35 feet. And for those of you who aren't up on your dinosaur references, a pteranodon is kind of similar to a pterodactyl, except that a pteranodon has an upwards projecting cranial crest and no teeth. Pterodactyls have a backwards-facing cranial crest and cone-shaped teeth. But either way, both of those prehistoric flying dinosaurs died out around 65 million years ago. Although the sightings in Texas completely stopped, it wasn't long before people in Illinois began seeing something that could have been a Thunderbird. According to Atlas Obscura, on July 25, 1977, the Lowe family of Lawndale, Illinois, were outside enjoying the summer evening. The adults were barbecuing and the children were playing in the yard. Their encounter was very strange and very alarming. Ruth Lowe was in the kitchen around 8:10 p.m. She was just washing up the dishes and putting things away, when suddenly she heard her 10-year-old nephew Marlin screaming outside. This wasn't a kids playing and goofing around kind of scream. This was a blood-curdling scream of total fear. When Ruth got outside, she was stunned to see that Marlin was running as fast as he could from 2 massive birds that were chasing him. They flew over his head, and in just a few split seconds, the birds dove down at the boy, digging their talons into his shirt and pecking him with their gigantic beaks. Ruth ran at them, trying desperately to beat the 2 birds off of her nephew, and that's when one of them got such a grip on Marlin's shoulders that it actually lifted the 56-pound boy off of the ground. Ruth continued to chase after this bird, flailing at it and beating it, until it finally gave up and let Marlin go, 35 feet from where it had picked him up. Rattled, Ruth went to the police, where she described the bird. She said, quote, "It had a white ring around its half-foot-long neck. The rest of the body was very black. The bird's bill was 6 inches in length and hooked at the end. The claws on the feet were arranged with 3 front, 1 in the back. Each wing, less the body, was 4 feet at the very least. The entire length of the bird's body, from beak to tail feather, was approximately 4½ feet. End quote. The cops reportedly laughed at her, and the local media pretty much made a mockery of the Lowe's story, to the point where kids at school started calling Marlin Bird Boy, and pranksters lobbed dead pigeons at the Lowe's front porch. Now, just for reference, Lawndale, Illinois, is a little under 140 miles from Cahokia, which is where the cave drawing of the Piazza bird was found. And so I think we will continue our dive into even more Thunderbird sightings after this really quick break. Hey, did you know? On February 2nd, 2019, workers at the Calbee Four Seas Company in Hong Kong discovered something a little alarming in their potato chip factory. When their equipment jammed up and they removed a stubborn spud, they quickly realized it was a little too heavy to be your normal everyday potato. The 3-inch wide, 2-pound potato wasn't a potato at all. It was a World War I-era German grenade. The unexploded ordnance had been harvested with other potatoes from a field in France before being shipped to the potato chip factory. Authorities quickly responded, carrying the antique explosive device out to an empty alley, where they were able to detonate it safely. Who'da thunk it?
All right, we're back. And to pick up where we left off, we thought that we'd continue with more Thunderbird sightings. It seems as though Pennsylvania has had the longest history of reported Thunderbird sightings, as far as official newspaper accounts go. Even the earliest pioneers, like Elvira Coates and Lewis Sheldon, heard stories about the Thunderbirds and claimed to have seen them for themselves. Sheldon even reported seeing 5 or 6 of them flying together in Potter County. In 1892, a man named Fred Murray from Cameron County reported an entire flock of massive birds near Dent's Run. He said that they were buzzard-like, but with a 16-foot wingspan, according to PAWilds.com. But Pennsylvania has had way more recent sightings beginning in September of 2001. LiveAbout.com reported in their article, The Giant Thunderbird Returns, that on June 13th, a resident of Greenville, Pennsylvania, was outside when a huge shadow passed overhead. Thinking that it was an ultralight aircraft, the witness was pretty startled to look up and see a huge bird instead. They watched it glide around for about 20 minutes and were able to confidently estimate that its wingspan was 15 feet across. It stopped to perch in a tree for a good 15 minutes before soaring off into the sky. A nearby neighbor also claimed to have seen it the next day. Then in July, about 60 miles away in Erie County, another witness had an encounter. They wrote an article about it for the Fortean Times magazine. In the article, they said that the bird's wingspan was between 15 and 17 feet, and that it was dark gray in color. It had, quote, little or no neck, and a circle of black under its head. Its beak was very thin and long, about a foot in length, end quote. That fall, on September 25th, a 19-year-old claimed to have heard a great flapping sound like, quote, flags flapping in a thunderstorm, while he or she was on Route 119 in South Greensburg. When the teenager looked up, they saw a grayish-brown bird with a head that was 3 feet long and a wingspan of 10 to 15 feet. It flew just 50 or 60 feet above the witness's head and over several big rigs that were traveling down the road. The witness observed the creature for about 90 seconds as it landed on a branch of a dead tree that sagged severely under the massive bird's weight. The witness said that the bird wasn't exactly graceful as it flew, but that it flapped its wings very slowly. Although the area was later searched, no evidence of the Thunderbird having been there was found. Clinton County, Pennsylvania, seemed to be the newest home for the elusive Thunderbird between 2010 and 2013. PAWilds.com mentions 2 sightings from that time. The first, less detailed account happened in the summer of 2010. 2 witnesses reported a very large bird with a long beak flying over Coudersport Pike. But in June of 2012, 2 young girls had quite a scare when what they described as a massive bird with a 14-foot wingspan flew over them at a campsite. They were in Chapman Township when the bird flew so low and so close to their heads that they both made a mad dash for shelter inside their cabin. There was apparently even a photograph of a Thunderbird taken in either Clinton or Potter County, Pennsylvania, way back in 1922. Local paranormal enthusiast Hiram Canmer claimed for years to have a photo that showed 6 men posing in front of a massive Thunderbird that they'd managed to kill and then nail to the side of a barn. This photo, which has kind of taken on a life of its own, was allegedly lost during a fire that engulfed Cranmer's home and caused his death. The latest sighting in Pennsylvania was in May of 2013. 2 friends were walking near Bryn Athyn Castle in southeastern Pennsylvania when they both heard a tremendous sound. It was so loud that both of them glanced up and were shocked to see a huge black bird perched in a nearby tree. They estimated that it was 4 feet tall and that its wings reached 10 feet tip to tip. Now, to backtrack a little bit, I wanted to point out that Thunderbirds in North American mythology are said to have a wingspan of up to 70 feet, and that they could shoot lightning bolts from their eyes. Obviously, the birds that people have been seeing all over the North American continent, from Oklahoma all the way to British Columbia, and from Massachusetts to Alberta, Canada, are not as big as that, and no one has claimed to see thunderbolts coming from their eyes. But no one has really been able to pinpoint or prove what kind of bird people have been seeing for over 200 years, because it doesn't really fit the description of any known bird. There are some contenders, though. First, there is the snowy albatross, also known as the wandering albatross. They are huge, with a wingspan up to 12 feet. They are typically all white and look like a giant seagull. They are also on the endangered list, with just 26,000 known to still exist. So, first, they don't really fit the description, and second, they don't live or migrate anywhere near North America. Then there are the known predatory birds, which seem to fit the description, but still don't make any sense. There's the California condor, which can have a 10-foot wingspan. However, California condors are not migratory, which means they don't travel the same established routes every year. They are known to fly as far as 100 miles a day in order to find food, but they aren't typically spotted in other parts of the U.S. The Andean condor, which is a bit bigger than its California cousin, can have a 10.5-foot wingspan. But they are also non-migratory, and they are not seen in the United States. They typically stick to South America. So with that said, the condor theory doesn't explain the Illinois or Pennsylvania Thunderbird encounters at all. And lastly, there is the Steller sea eagle, a raptor with a wingspan of 6 to 8 feet. Steller sea eagles live in Russia, Korea, China, and Taiwan. However, beginning in 2020, a few of them have been spotted in Massachusetts, Maine, Texas, Nova Scotia, and Newfoundland, and also Alaska. So, perhaps that's what people have been seeing in and around Juneau, or maybe not. In January of 2002, a 43-year-old heavy equipment operator named Moses Kupchiak contacted the Anchorage Daily News to report a large, strange bird sighting. Like other witnesses, he first thought that the dark shadow flying over his head was an airplane. It certainly was the size and shape of one until it banked to the left and he could see that it was a massive bird. Most recently in 2018, the Juneau Empire ran an article about possible Thunderbird sightings. It all started with a Facebook post. Tabitha Bauer was driving through Mendenhall Valley, a neighborhood in Juneau, when she saw something pretty remarkable. She posted, "Attention! I was just driving by the movie theater in the valley, and there was a huge black bird flying above the road. The wingspan had to be at least 20 feet. It was almost as wide as the road. I have lived here all my life and have never seen anything like that. It freaked me out. It was not a raven or an eagle. This isn't a joke. This thing was huge, almost the size of a small airplane. Did anyone else see it?" And that was the end of her post. A Juneau Empire reporter interviewed Bauer in January of 2018. Bauer added that she was driving to the bank of Mendenhall Loop around 4 p.m. on January 16th. When she was between the Mendenhall Mall and Glacier Cinema, headed in the direction of the Super Bear grocery store, that it was raining, and as she put on her wipers and looked up, she noticed a bird that was, quote, "like an eagle, but 5 times as big." The massive jet black bird was so huge that its wingspan was as wide as the road, and as it flew about 50 feet above her truck, it kept in pace with her driving speed. Completely freaked out, she posted about her sighting on the Juneau Community Collective Facebook page and was surprised by the number of responses. Some, of course, weren't nice, but others confirmed what she had seen and were just as baffled. Another witness, who went by only a first name, Diane, also spoke with the Juneau Empire about her experience. Diane said that a few years earlier, she had gone outside of her house in Lemon Creek, which is about 5 miles from Mendenhall Valley, to have a cigarette. It was dark out, so it kind of spooked her that she could hear dozens of birds freaking out, as though something was scaring them. She went inside to grab a flashlight, and when she got back outside and aimed it at a nearby tree, she lit up a bird that was so big that she couldn't see it all in the beam of the flashlight. The following morning, her yard was littered with broken tree branches. So, could it have been a stellar sea eagle? Perhaps, except that all the witnesses insist that what they saw was way too big. Now, I think it's worth mentioning that I looked up the Mendenhall Loop online, and it says that it has a width of about 37 feet, and the main stretch of Mendenhall Road, where the mall is, appears to be 4 lanes wide in the pictures. I looked at it, so either way, we're not talking about a dinky little 1-lane road.
Right. It's a normal-sized main downtown road.
Right.
And the wings stretched all the way across.
It's quite remarkable.
Yeah.
A stellar sea eagle's wingspan certainly wouldn't stretch across the road that wide.
No.
It's just not going to happen. At the top of our story, we had mentioned that Thunderbirds are part of North American mythology, from U.S. to Canada. Well, most modern-day sightings of the Thunderbirds aren't just a U.S. thing. They've also been spotted in Canada as well, as far back as the 1860s. According to mysteriesofcanada.org, Thunderbirds have been seen by men of the Blackfoot Nation. Both White Bear and the parents of Dog Takes a Gun sighted them in what is now Calgary, Alberta. In 1870, Blackfoot warriors encountered a Thunderbird during a raiding party against the Crow. Cree Indians from Alberta reportedly gave a Thunderbird wing to a curio dealer, which was on display in his shop well into the 1940s. In 1926, two hikers in the Canadian Rockies saw a massive bird carrying some sort of animal in its talons. As they watched, this gigantic eagle-like brown bird dropped the carcass, which turned out to be a 15-pound mule deer. Interestingly enough, during 1974, just a couple years before the sightings in Texas, a group of 3 people, Danielle and Suzette Caron and Remy Bassett, sighted a colossal-sized bird near Louvecourt, Quebec. Danielle noticed the bird first, as it was drinking stagnant water. But later, all 3 of them saw it as it flew overhead, carrying a beaver in its talons. They said it was mostly white in color, not the usual brown, and that it stood about 4 feet tall. They refused to estimate how wide its wingspan was, because they were afraid of being publicly ridiculed. Now, typically, an average-sized eagle can carry a 6 to 8 pound animal. So the fact that the dropped mule deer weighed 15 pounds is a little remarkable. But what's even more remarkable is that the beavers tend to weigh between 40 and 70 pounds, way too much for an eagle to carry. So it doesn't seem very likely that it was an eagle. California condors did exist in Canada up until the early 1900s. So it's possible that the hikers in 1926 saw a condor. However, California condors are scavengers, not the type of birds that pick up prey and fly off with it. In fact, their ability to carry anything in their talons is pretty weak. So a condor definitely wasn't carting around a 14-pound deer or 40-pound beaver.
What I find remarkable is that a beaver would weigh more than a deer.
I know. That is pretty interesting.
Like, I understand it was probably a baby deer, but that's not what I would expect.
No. And I kind of feel stupid because, well, I've seen plenty of beaver down in the river behind the house, and there were tons of deer. But yeah, it's kind of strange. Visually, it just doesn't add up to me.
Right.
So perhaps it was a Steller's sea eagle, which is known to carry prey that can be twice their own weight. They are also about the right size. But the reported coloring of the 1974 bird, which the trio said was mostly white, doesn't match up with the typical coloring of a sea eagle either. So, what's the bottom line?
I don't know. It's a conundrum.
It is. Although these enormous birds don't have a 70-foot wingspan or seem to exhibit supernatural abilities like the Thunderbirds of mythology, they are beyond the norm as far as wingspan, aggression towards humans, and the ability to carry very heavy prey in their talons. Now, maybe it's just me, but I can't even imagine driving down the road and seeing a bird that's as big as an airplane flying 50 feet over the hood of my car.
No, I would not want to see that.
And, with that said, I like birds. Hey, as long as they're perched on something. But I hate flying birds. It's just a thing I've always had. I don't like the idea that they're flying around over, and they tend to poop on things.
Right.
But that's not it. I just don't like them coming, when you watch them dive down.
Mm-hmm.
I've always hated birds.
Did you see that movie when you were a kid, The Birds?
Oh, yes.
Oh, that might be why.
But I didn't find that, it was creepy, scary,
Mm-hmm.
but they were little birds.
Right.
Even though there was a lot of them.
Yeah.
Not something like a Thunderbird.
Right.
And this reminds me of Mothman also.
Mm-hmm.
He's owl-like.
Yeah, I think there is connections.
They're very similar.
Yeah. And even a normal-sized eagle, as a human, if you see a normal-sized eagle, they're pretty awe-inspiring. that thing could mess you up.
Exactly.
So to see something that's even bigger than that, or the California condor or the albatross, it's got to be very unnerving.
Yeah, well, we used to have the hawks up at the house.
Mm-hmm.
And you were always afraid for the small cats and dogs.
And the rabbits and the squirrels.
Right.
And, yeah.
Well, those weren't my pets, so.
Right.
That's just part of nature. Rabbits and mice and things like that.
Right.
But not dogs or cats.
Right.
And we have the big turkey buzzards out back.
Mm-hmm. They
fly by our window all the time. Yeah, they're creepy looking.
Yeah, and they're huge. Not as big as what people are seeing other places, but they're huge.
Yeah. I'm just not a fan of birds. Not that I'm saying, there's anything wrong with it. I just don't like them. You'd never see one in my house.
Well,
There's
not on
no
purpose.
Right. I prefer bats over them.
Yeah. I don't know.
See, I don't find bats creepy.
They swoop at your head, though, and you said that's what you don't like about birds.
They're after mosquitoes.
Oh.
And bugs.
Right.
They're not there to bother you.
Right.
I mean, I had a bat house on the house for a long time. The kids loved it.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't be inviting any birds to my house. You don't see me putting out bird feeders or anything like that.
Well,
perhaps in a past life, I had a run-in with a really nasty big bird.
Maybe. Well, everyone, if you would like to know more about Thunderbirds, including the mythology, which is incredibly interesting, you can always check out our sources in our show notes for all of the links.
And with that said, that about wraps it up for this episode. We'll see you all next week for an all-new episode of Where Our Minds Wander.
See you soon.